So great, this is exciting. Some great sessions there, and a nice football. Thank you for that. It looks pretty cool. So before earlier today, Mark and David talked about the idea of culture and the impact of penetrating the culture for entertainment, and particularly with sports. So when I think of Wilson, the first thing I always think of now is the movie Castaway, and Wilson, the soccer or the volleyball, and I would imagine that a lot of people probably think that as well. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and what impact it's had, if any?
For sure. I think my job moving forward should be to make sure that that isn't the first thing that comes to mind. How about that Duke or some of the other? but I get it. I think it was 22 years ago the movie came out, and Wilson was approached probably, let's say, a couple years before that still, by fax to donate or to give 36 volleyballs, I think as the legend goes, to Fox Studios. And somebody picked up the fax, sent off the volleyballs, and later we got, the first cut of the movie, and all of a sudden realized what an enormous impact that would have on our brand. So paid $0 for that placement, which is ridiculous. I think that, it still is one of our top volleyball sellers to this day globally. What's interesting is that's a movie that's really stuck generation after generation, so I think that's also helped. But definitely a fan favorite, and we've got, a couple of them strewn about the office, and it's, to your first question, it is kind of the talk of the space, no matter what else you've got in the same.
How many people know we're talking about? All right, everyone, see, they love it. I've always thought that, more of that kind of branded entertainment or incorporating brands into cultural moments, I think, and penetrating the culture in that way has great impact. When I worked at Unilever, we actually launched one of the Dove brands in The Apprentice, and Joyce over there is raise your hand, Joyce. She was the CEO and still is, I think, of the company that put that together, AIM Productions, for us. But it had great impact. So I feel like when I was a kid, Wilson was this. It was like one of the big kind of sports-related brands, whether it was for tennis or football or whatever. It was like one of the brands. Then over the years, as I got older, we really saw the way Nike and even like now Under Armour have really exploded as big brands and totally associated with sports. But then I saw recently that the new basketballs are back to being Wilson. So clearly you're doing some things now that's call it transforming a bit. So can you talk a little bit about the story of Wilson and what it was and what it is now and how the business is doing and things like that?
Sure. So Wilson Sporting Goods is over 100 years old. We're based in Chicago. And I would say for a good, I think we're exactly 107 years old. For a good 100 years, let's say, we were a really great product supplier. And over the last 7 or 8 years, we've really gone through this brand transformation, really driven by, in some part, though we were a little late to the party, by the Nikes and Under Armours who really built these phenomenal sports brands. And from my seat, being in the sporting goods space, without really, until recently, having had the luxury of soft goods or apparel to pull on, we really we only had one leg to stand on, which was the equipment that we made. And as the world around us changed, new brands emerged, like I just mentioned. The wholesale world completely shifted, and customers for us, like Sports Authority, went out of business. The whole world became more D2C focused. We recognized, that we had to pick up our game, and instead of just focusing on, let's call it distribution or placements, which was that legacy wholesale model, we had to connect with consumers and players and coaches in a completely different way. And that really required us to think about how we were staffed, think about where we were spending our time and money. And I'd say a couple great tells from how successful I guess we've been in that journey, and we still have a ways to go, is we opened up our own retail about 2 years ago. We launched our own sportswear brands. We've got about 5 stores now in the U.S., a few in New York and a couple in Chicago. And as you mentioned, we were able to take back the NBA after 37 years. So we're looking to continue to find ways to connect with those consumers, and absolutely kind of thinking about, we have this mantra that says act like a big brand, and that's intended to remind us that, we are in some pretty spectacular places in sport, but I think what we hadn't done for such a long time was talk about that in a way that consumers could latch onto.
Really? So also now really thinking more about brand. How did you get the NBA to start to have a Wilson Bowl again?
I think it starts with that 100 years of being really great basketball. Fun little fact, we were the ball for the first 37 years, lost it for 37, and picked it back up. So somewhere there's a lucky 37. Maybe that's a FanDuel prop bet. I don't know. But I think it comes down to product. One of the things, 85% of my business, I oversee marketing for football, basketball, soccer, and volleyball, is driven by a big partnership. So that's NBA, NFL, NCAA. We have to be good at service. And so as you can imagine, for the last couple of years, like I'm sure many of you in the room felt, the supply chain inventory issues required us to not just be a good brand builder, but to show up really as humans interacting with those partners on the other side of the table. So I'd say service, kind of all the tenets of brand building, were kind of the big ones. And then I think just our reputation. Yeah. We had really been working. One of our mantras on basketball was matter as much off the court as on it. And that wasn't something that we were doing 9 years ago, let's say. And so that allowed me and my team to basically have a lot more fun in the lifestyle side of the sport. It's such a, both football and basketballs are drivers of culture. And once we latched onto that, I think those connections with those consumers, the other leagues took note, and so forth.
It's interesting. It's a good transformation story. It reminds me of, I once had the chance to talk to the CMO of Nike during the early days of their explosion, and she was talking about how Phil Knight was the CEO of Nike. He was risk-taking, and he was laser-focused on the Nike brand, and he made a decision. This is kind of a phenomenal story. At the time, like you talked about Sports Authority, there were other sporting goods type stores that now it's like Dick's, but there used to be a bunch of them. And he decided that Nike wasn't just he didn't want it to just be a sneaker, as a sneaker would be, a product in its own right. He wanted Nike to really represent competition, to be something bigger and, supersede that. So he made the decision to pull distribution from Sears, which at the time was, the biggest retailer of their product, but it wasn't associated with sports or competition. It was a little bit like Walmart, and he didn't want that. He only wanted to distribute it at Herman's and Sports Authority and places like that. And that took incredible guts, because he took a big hit in short-term sales because so much of their distribution is there. But over the long term, it turned out to be this amazing way to transform a business from just a product category to something much bigger. So I think those kind of stories are really powerful. So it's good to see some of the things you're doing. What other kind of things are you doing now as you talk about kind of transforming the brand?
Yeah, so I'd say Wilson.com, our own retail, is really important to us. Just thinking about what that glide path looks like, global growth. I think when we talked, I shared the story that before we picked the NBA back up, 90% of my basketball business was in the U.S., and here in a couple of years, it'll be 50% is rest of world. So really focusing on, all the usual places like China, making sure we're growing the game in places like Africa and India, and really just concentrating on driving growth through expanding that global footprint and sort of the luxury that comes with really partnering with leagues like the NFL and NBA and engaging consumers through them.
And how's the business doing now?
Well, coming out of the pandemic and through the pandemic, sports was a category that I think saw a ton of success. Tennis, golf, what have you, basketball for sure. Some of those sports that you could play safely on your own. So we've been very fortunate, particularly in my categories, to continue to see growth. Basketball for us is obviously one of the biggest growth drivers in the company, just as a result of, not to keep talking NBA at an NFL meeting, as a result of that pickup. Our NFL business is incredibly strong. So business is good. People are out there playing sports more than they ever have been. And I think that's, I would like to say that consumers are focused on those experiences, and sports, whether you're consuming it through play or consuming it through fandom, are kind of at that, thankfully, an evergreen enchantment, I would say.
You think we'll start to see more like product branding or clothing or things like that with the brand?
For sure. I think what we've enjoyed for the last 100+ years as a brand with really strong performance product equity, we're now in the process of really leveraging that, tapping that, if you will, to get consumers to not only love the equipment that they choose, but to love our brand so much that they're willing to wear it. Yeah. And I think that's a very different, I suppose, brief. And as you think about transformation and brand, that's also a different set of tactics that help you do that. So, I've been at Wilson 8 years, so I've seen it all from the beginning of the transformation to where we've been today. And I'd say we're really taking some interesting steps where I feel like that act like a big brand is starting to come to life in ways that I can tangibly kind of point to.
And so what is, so if Nike's about competition and, if you were to talk about it as what the brand represents, how would you describe it? Either one word or one sentence or
Wilson?
something? Yeah.
We like to talk about the democratization of sport, and so I'd say what makes us different than, and I realize that's 3 words. We like to, yeah, I think the narrative is that we want to enable access and play, and we want to be the very first ball you ever choose. And we've got a guy on our ad staff, Jordan Palmer, who says that we also want to be the last ball that you ever get to play with in something like the Duke. So a player knows they've arrived when they're playing with that Wilson NFL game ball. So I'd say it's that journey of, I want to inspire kids to play, and I want to be that first touch, but I also want to go with them on that journey. And that journey could end abruptly after a couple of years, and maybe you got a couple autograph balls, or it might take you to the pros. And so I think it's being there every step of the way.
That's cool. I actually like that. It is, because it's interesting. It's like, you're a little kid and you're playing with something, and then it also, if they see it, what somebody mentioned earlier, you have to see it to be it or something like that. And if you see the ball in the pros and you're playing with it also, there's like some connection there, I would imagine.
I've worked in a couple different industries, and I'll say there's something pretty cool about having that authenticity just to lean back on and not having to manufacture it, right? I can tell a play with the pros plays story, see it in the game on Sunday night, and that's a pretty good reason to believe. And I think that's how we've really started to kind of inspire, whether they're young players or avid players on a roster, to keep them in the Wilson family.
Okay, great. So just to kind of broaden this a little bit from Wilson, can you talk a little bit about, given that we're here for Soup Week, and we're talking sports marketing, what are some of the areas or the trends that you're seeing in sports marketing, or call lessons learned, or something that as an audience they could kind of take away with, these 3 or 4 things really work?
Yeah, I think for us, and this might be just driven by the world we've been in for the last couple of years, there seems to be this shift from a serious real focus on performance marketing back to tactics and programs that feel more intimate. And so to me, that is reflected in the stores that we're opening, where you get to not only maybe touch and feel the product, but experience the brand through the personality that we've created. You can go play pickleball in one of the stores or shoot hoops. And I think it's that it's connecting that brand story with a brand experience. We're doing that at NFLX, as we have been, where we bring our Ada football factory. We bring a mobile version of that, so you can watch a football being made by hand and participate in that. So I think it's those intimate sort of experiences that are much more tactile. I think there's always going to be sort of a social component to it, so making sure you're on the right channels, that your content, I think, in the last, if I just look at my career at Wilson, the content I've created has changed dramatically in the 8 years that I've been there, just given the consumer that I'm talking to, their attention span, sort of how they view the authenticity of that piece as well. So I'd say there's also a few trends in content that we're keeping an eye on. Thankfully, I've got younger folks on my team who can do that. I can't keep up.
About this whole social thing.
Yeah, and I think there's an aha moment. I don't know if this is necessarily a trend, but it certainly is an insight, let's say, shaping kind of what we'll be doing in the future, which is I want you to make the connection that, yes, of course, I'm the ball of, the Super Bowl, and I've scored every single point ever in the NFL, but I also want you to step back and think of, and this is really kind of our job as marketers at Wilson, to connect the dots. I'm also in the hands, or was in the hands, of Roger Federer and Serena Williams on the courts of the NBA and NCAA. So we have a really interesting opportunity in front of us, and I think our sportswear and our apparel will help us connect those dots of bringing the full brand together and then really leveraging that power instead of just being so sports specific.
That's great. Actually, the whole concept of experiences, I think, is getting more and more, in not just sports marketing, I think in marketing overall. What are your thoughts on some of the newer technologies where, call it the metaverse or whatever, where I've heard a lot of the different leagues have started talking about ways that people can experience going to a game or playing in a game through some of these virtual worlds. Are you guys doing anything in that space, or have any thoughts on it?
We are. We partner with the NFL on Roblox, so we're in their sort of all of their fun games that they're doing there. We've done scavenger hunts and the like with them. We've definitely kept an eye on all things metaverse, thought about at some point NFTs, and I think luckily our slowness ended up kind of being the right path. Sometimes that works to your advantage. We like to say that we want to be the official ball of any world or universe out there, right? So we have some work to do to figure out how we show up in the metaverse, or in a meaningful way, and in a way that is not a betrayal of who we are as a brand. So I think that we're open to the possibilities, but for right now, I feel like this world keeps us pretty busy.
The real world works. So how about anybody in the audience? Any of you guys have any key questions right there?
Yeah. Talk really loud. Amanda, Deirdre Lester, we met a while back. I haven't seen you. It's great to see you. I'm curious, I thought you might go there with the last question in terms of how you guys are seeing the very fast transition in the college sports landscape with the opening up of name, image, likeness deals for athletes, and is that a space where you guys are actively engaged right now? Just overall, how are you seeing that now? How it affects you?
Yeah, so for me, NIL, and this is more of a function of just how we're set up at Wilson, feels like it could be a black hole to manage. We have a couple pro athletes that represent Wilson in basketball and football, let's say, and I feel like, candidly speaking, we have a hard enough time getting our activations right with just those big guys or those popular female athletes. So we're really focused on trying to decide what the role of, I should say, athletes of notoriety is overall. And so yes, we've got the pro players, but when it gets into name, image, and likeness, I suppose we default, and we're not really playing there in a big way, at least in my categories. And the honest answer is that we just get kind of torn up by the shoe brands. We can't compete with what they're investing. However, we are, in most cases, I'll throw out a football stat, since given where we are, I think we score about 75 to 85% of all high school championship points today. So we're already in their hands. I would rather attack it from a point of view, and this is from a manpower, investment, and sort of resource perspective, where I inspire that reach to mean something to the players who are already choosing us, versus paying for that. That might be a little bit naive, but that's part of that brand transformation, I guess. That's always a tricky question for me. You could tell I fumbled it to death, because I think it's still such a new territory, and I want to make sure that we enter that space in a way that feels right for us, that we can do, and that we can do so in a kind of sustainable way.
Anyone else got anything? Over there.
Here you go.
Thank you. Hi, Katie Corbett, Power Digital Marketing. I was curious if you could talk a little bit more, because it sounds like my creative brain is going, you're going to this really cool storytelling element of Wilson, all the different sports and product side, but then there's all the authenticity, and then you touched on performance. So what does performance look like since you started 8 years ago versus now? Now you have this new deal with the NBA. Where do you see everything going from a performance side? Like, what are those KPIs potentially? And then as you start to expand, where do you see them changing?
And when you say performance, that you mean performance marketing, not performance product?
I guess it's technically both in theory,
Okay.
if you're looking at both of it, yeah.
Okay. So for us, I think it's, if you think about the fact that we're trying to grow our D2C business and connect with consumers, I think there's a lot of community building and community growth, so we focus a lot there. I think since I've been at Wilson, we had no email databases, and we're, building them out. Same with social media and our communities there. So community growth, those engagement rates, I think for a while, and this is no longer the case. We are under a management that was chasing the big, how many followers do you have? And now, of course, it's about the engagement rate. Again, probably teaching you nothing at this point. So engagement is really important for us. And then I think, if you think about, we're in this position as a brand where we enjoy very strong and high awareness, but we don't have, or we haven't historically had, and that's changing, that emotional connection with the consumer. So a lot of our KPIs are driven by those brand health metrics, where it's a brand I choose, it's a brand I would recommend, turning consumers into advocates, and sort of the numbers that go behind that.
You have any more plans to do any kind of integrations into any big movies with the volleyball, or that's done?
Not unless
no
Tom Hanks
amplification
is
of
come back, and
Wilson.
That would be tragic. That's a story of it. Doesn't
That's
need to.
done. Yeah, it's funny. I saw on the movie Office Space, which also has the red swing line staplers, kind of the same kind of thing. It has like a cult-like following, and they actually, it was done, and then they reissued it, and it was like one of their biggest sellers still, which is kind of amazing. But
We're in an interesting position, and we're a very humble company, I would say. But when you think about product placements from our perspective, if you're, pretending that you're putting on your movie is about an NFL game or an NBA game, we don't really have to pay for that placement, because if you're going to be authentic, you're going to use this anyway.
You're already cultured.
That's kind of where we lean. Yeah, we've already paid for that many times over.
all right. Well, one quick shout out to Mike Ford. Happy birthday, my friend. An ex-athlete in his own right. And Eagles or Chiefs?
Oh, I like to stay neutral on that. I've got quite a few Eagles fans that I am going to the game with, so you got to go with, you want your friends to have a great experience.
I'm going Chiefs. Mahomes. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.